All right. Hello. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. My name is Amanda Horner. I am the Safety and Mobility Planner with Mid-America Regional Council. And once again, welcome you to the Pathways of Vision Zero Summit. We're excited to be hosting this summit in an effort, of course, to engage our community to reduce traffic crash fatalities and serious injuries to zero. So for this session, we encourage you to turn cameras on so our guests feel like they are interacting with you, but please keep mics off during the presentation. We invite you to type any questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we can read them to our presenters at the end during our question and answer time. We do want to take a quick moment to recognize our summit planning partners represented here. So thank you to all of these organizations that helped make this series possible. Before we get into this session, we want to invite area jurisdictions to take lessons learned from Pathways to Vision Zero Summit and put them into action in your community. Mark will be hosting a two-part workshop with subject matter experts designed to help you bring policy and initial plans to make streets safer for everyone. So save the dates for December 4th and 8th. So registration or interest rather, Alex just shared a link in the chat. If you're interested, please fill out that form and we'll keep you posted. So we are, of course, excited to welcome and continue our series from temporary to transformative. So our speakers are Maggie Green and Duran Netzel. So Maggie is the Public Information Officer for Public Works for Kansas City, Missouri, which involves various forms of communication between Kansas City residents and Public Works staff, and occasionally presenting a summit series like today. Maggie has been with KCMO for almost 2 years and has her master's of Public Administration from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Duran started his career with real estate and construction industry, but realized land use and walkability were lacking in the community, so transitioned to lead the tactical urbanism group Better Block KC for several years. Duran was then able to turn his passion into a career and founded Street Smarts Design and Build, which focuses on micro-mobility infrastructure, traffic calming, and walkability. When not figuring out how to make communities more walkable, Duran can be found tending to his land known as Blue River Food Forest. That was a alliteration there, which is a permaculture-based garden, native tree nursery. So welcome to Maggie and Duran, and I will turn the screen over to Maggie.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to get my screen loaded up here. Amanda, thanks for the introduction. Let me know when you can see the screen.
You're good to go.
Okay, awesome. Well, Amanda kind of summed it up. My role as the Public Information Officer with KCMO Public Works. But I did want to share a couple photos of me and my role that really is interfacing between our engineers and street maintenance crews and the public, the media, our policymakers. Sometimes my role even involves riding in a snowplow at a Super Bowl parade. So I really do enjoy my job that I've been at KCMO for almost 2 years. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my past work and its sort of relevance to Vision Zero and this topic today. Prior to working at KCMO, my previous work, I was the Director of Programs for Bike Walk KC. And that allowed me to lead and project manage and work on the community side of a lot of these traffic calming projects. So now I'm sort of in this unique position to be able to marry my on-the-ground community experience with actual policy and implementation side of things in my role now at Public Works. So very excited to be here this morning to talk about traffic calming demonstrations and how they have been transformative in KCMO. And Duran?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for that great introduction. I think you introduced myself better than I could have. I will just say I'm happy to be here. Thank everyone for tuning in. I think we have a really fun presentation to give with a lot of valuable information that I think can be taken back to all communities to help make your communities more safer, walkable, and ultimately reach that goal of zero traffic deaths.
So today we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to start by just talking about simply the benefits of traffic calming demonstrations. We'll go through some definitions and distinctions off the bat before we dive in, so we're all on the same page. We'll talk about a timeline of traffic calming demonstrations. These efforts have been in the works for almost a decade in KCMO prior to Do-Run and I ever being involved in these projects. So we'll talk through sort of how all of these projects have culminated and evolved over the years. And as well as discussing, of course, through these projects, lots of challenges and lessons learned. And through the last several years, there are a lot of opportunities for the future. So we'll kind of close with talking about a few things we're excited about for this next year. And then we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. So I'll go ahead and start a little bit about, why is it important to do traffic calming demonstrations? What are the benefits? It really allows the community to experiment with and experience different designs without incurring large expenses or elaborate, installations and construction. So they're cheap, quick, and relatively easy to implement. So that's a huge benefit to a traffic calming demonstration. Additionally, you can immediately see the impact and safety benefits of what you're installing. Sometimes you'll have intended consequences, sometimes unintended consequences, but it's really allowing you to test out an idea in real life. So that is a huge, huge benefit. Not to mention, these demonstrations can garner support and spark momentum for permanent improvements. We'll talk a little bit about these examples and how a lot of them have actually sparked permanent infrastructure change as some of the outcomes. And so that's a huge benefit to doing a temporary installation, is because hopefully you can get funding and momentum and support to do a permanent change that has huge safety benefits. Lastly, and this isn't the last benefit, but just on our list here, it can serve as a huge community engagement tool. And we actually have a slide dedicated to that here in a second. So in addition to those benefits, something else we wanted to mention is that we know demand for traffic calming is high. And we can see that in several different areas. KCMO has what's called the Public Improvements Advisory Committee. It's a citizen committee that's made up of 13 people, 2 from each of our council districts and a chairperson. They're appointed by the mayor and city council. And their function is to solicit resident input and make recommendations for the capital budget. So there's an annual application process that residents and neighborhoods can submit ideas. And so these are everything from installing dog poop stations at a park to installing art, to stormwater improvements. And a lot of these requests that come through that come to Public Works involve traffic calming. So we know through the PIAC process that this is a pretty popular request in all of our neighborhoods. As an anecdote too, I often receive email requests from various neighborhoods or council aides about wanting to install speed bumps. So we get a lot of speed bump requests. And I think the common ground, the message is, I want to slow down traffic in my neighborhood. We know speed bumps are kind of like a traditional traffic calming measure. And so a lot of folks, what they think the easiest solution is installing speed bumps. We'll talk about lots of different measures, that we can do to slow traffic down. But I think the important part is we're hearing this concern over and over again that I want to slow down traffic on my neighborhood street. My neighborhood street is unsafe. How do I slow traffic down? So that is a concern that we hear a lot that comes through KCMO Public Works. So we do know that that's demonstrating a high need for traffic calming. We'll talk a little bit about something new that we did during the pandemic called the Open Streets Program. That enabled a permit so that neighborhoods could actually close down their neighborhood street and create sort of a bike ped recreational safe street or slow street. And so we had over 50 permits approved at various locations. And so very quickly, without having a lot of outreach about that program, we did get a lot of requests. So that is telling us also that there is this demand. So with all of these sort of anecdotal data points here, I don't know that we can actually even quite quantify or realize how high the demand is, but we do know that slowing down traffic, safety on the streets is a priority in all of our neighborhoods. So getting back to, I did want to just kind of call out the community engagement piece about traffic calming. Traffic calming can really provide unique community engagement opportunities. Residents can not only experience different design scenarios, but they can offer their feedback. And they can also take part in actually shaping or helping create built environment changes. So these 2 photos, we actually had the community members helping us put the cones out and put the tape down. So it's a very active participation involved in traffic calming projects. So I'm going to kick it over to Duran to talk a little bit about some important definitions before we go any further.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the difference between tactical urbanism and guerrilla urbanism. Sometimes they get confused, sometimes they get kind of used interchangeably. But in my mind and in my work, there's very much a difference between the two. According to the dictionary, tactical is small scale actions done with a larger purpose. Definitely fits within both of those terms. Guerrilla is an unauthorized, edgy, or disruptive version of an activity, which about 2/3 of that falls in with tactical urbanism. But the big distinction there is the unauthorization. So tactical urbanism is done with proper approvals, the proper permits, while guerrilla urbanism is just done without any of that. It sometimes pops up overnight or sometimes when nobody's looking. But tactical urbanism done with permits, guerrilla urbanism done without permits. And I have a couple different examples to share of this. Maggie and I do want to be very clear that every project that we're going to talk about here had the proper permits, the proper approvals. Almost everything I've ever done in this city had the proper permits and the proper permissions. There is one example here I'm going to talk about that I did not ask for permission for. And I'm going to talk about the benefit of that and then another counter story to that as well. So one of the very few times I did guerrilla urbanism in Kansas City, Missouri was in my neighborhood. One of the most popular bus stops in the city at 39th and Main got taken out by a very high speed moving car. The shelter was destroyed, the benches were removed. I asked the ATA several times if we could get this stop put back into place. Can we get some benches? After a few months, I continued to get no response. And I told them, I said, look, if you guys aren't going to put the benches out there, I'm going to do it. And I said, I'm giving you 2 weeks after I had given them a few months. And there was no response. So I went out there, I put the benches out there. And I live just around the corner. I put one bench out there. I went back to go get the next bench. Before I could even get back, there was people already sitting on the first bench. And they lasted for quite a while. There was all kinds of people using them. However, 2 days after I put those benches out there, sure enough, a new bus shelter showed up. And, it was something that needed to happen. And unfortunately, it was the benches that made that happen. But you got to be very delicate and very careful when doing something like that. And I made sure to be very transparent about what I was doing, but I didn't get the proper permission to do so. And that worked out okay. I don't think the ATA hates me, but I think it was a good kind of kick in the rear that was needed to kind of get the bus stop put back together. Another example of that is in Wichita. This is a pretty well-known demonstration, but the effect of it is not very well known. So in Wichita, there's a group similar to Better Block KC, although much more guerrilla in nature. And they were upset that the bus or the bike lanes were not protected. And they asked several times to get them protected to no avail. And so what they did, which was imitated throughout the country, they went out and put plungers to serve as bollards. Everybody thought it was pretty funny and pretty creative. It certainly drew attention. There was national publications that covered it all around the country. Several other activists throughout the country also imitated it. And sure enough, about 2 weeks later, bollards showed up from Public Works and the bike lane was protected. However, this gentleman who did this was essentially ran out of town. He was threatened with arrest. He was threatened with fines. He was told he would never be able to work with Public Works Department again. And eventually he had to leave his hometown of Wichita and move on to another community because he was not able to work in Wichita because of the guerrilla activity he had done. And so while it can be very tempting to do some of this stuff without the proper permission, there is a reason for it. And it's not just because decision makers want control, but there's proper authorizations and checklists that we go through to make sure things are done right and properly. And so although guerrilla urbanism can be effective at times, I highly encourage you to ask for the proper permissions, go through the approvals, jump through the hoops, and do what's necessary to do it right, because it will much more pay off in the long run. And now we're going to kind of dive into a little bit about our traffic calming demonstrations throughout Kansas City, Missouri. As Maggie mentioned, we have nearly a decade of history of traffic calming in Kansas City. Before Maggie and I were ever involved in this work, Better Block KC was formed by some activists, I believe the Downtown Neighborhood Association, and some very talented designers from BNIM. kicked off Better Block KC with the first ever traffic calming event, which was on Grand. It was called Making Grand Grand. We'll talk about that a little bit down the road. After that event, there was annual demonstrations held by the loosely formed Better Block KC, not a legal entity, just a group, a rotating group of passionate activists that want to see a safer and more vibrant street. And those demonstrations continued to build on each other through 2013 and 2016. In 2017, things really started to get fun. There was a Planners for Health grant distributed by TrailNet that went to Bike Walk KC that helped establish their lending library, which we'll help talk about. It offers materials for communities to hold their own tactical urbanism events. And with that came a demonstration at 38th in Warwick, which I think kind of helped set the precedent and test out a theory that I utilize in my work throughout the city. In 2018, things got even more fun. We won a AARP Livable Communities grant, and we held the first ever month-long demonstration on Oak Street. We'll talk about that a little bit down the road as well. And then Maggie was doing some phenomenal work with Bike Walk KC in the historic Northeast neighborhoods, where she was leading week-long demonstrations funded by the Aetna Foundation. In 2020, we kind of feel like, I think we all kind of feel like we've entered a new era in this world, but we've also kind of entered a new era of traffic calming in Kansas City, Missouri. The Open Streets program, which we'll talk a little bit about as well, was the first program of its kind throughout the country and was imitated all throughout the country. The Asphalt Initiative went on the ground, which we'll talk about a little bit as well. The BLM murals was a new thing for everybody, which brought a great awareness to the cause, and really were unbelievable, honestly. They were absolutely beautiful. And now we're starting to see some permanent neighborhood traffic calming projects go in the ground in different neighborhoods. So it truly is a new era. It leads us to be very optimistic and excited for the future. Maggie's going to talk a little bit further in the presentation about some of the policy work that's being done. And we have an incredible opportunity with the Vision Zero resolution in Kansas City, Missouri for quick build projects, of which we kind of feel like the foundation has been set by these tactical urbanism events. And we'll kind of get into all of this here right about now. One thing I want to note is, you hear Better Block KC a lot. They're kind of the face and somewhat the ringleaders of a lot of these demonstrations, but it could not be done without an enormous amount of dedicated partners and participants. We love to work with students. Kansas City Design Center is one that shows up year after year. UMKC and also KU's architecture program have been phenomenal to work with throughout the years. Design firms have offered not only funding and sponsorship, but they've allowed their folks who are incredibly talented and really have the knowledge to make these successful. They've allowed them to work on these events, sometimes even during their working hours. Some of those that stick out are BNIM, Confluence, Gould Evans, and Helix. Of course, none of this is possible without government permission. Really, all of the governments that we've worked with throughout the region have been phenomenal. The UG of Wyandotte County, KCMO Planning, KCMO Public Works, who has allowed everything to happen, and then KCMO Parks, who allows the events to happen on the boulevards. All have been phenomenal to work with. And of course, local businesses are an important component of these types of demonstrations. Because I think, we're really focusing this presentation on the safety and as a way to bring down road deaths. But traffic calming has an enormous impact on businesses. And it's not just retail businesses, but it's the local shops, it's the eclectic businesses, it's the businesses that we love. And we're thankful to have worked with a lot of phenomenal businesses, Broadway Roasters, Maker Village, Val Mayest, and many others that are too long to list. And then another important aspect of traffic calming is the neighborhood groups. We're really careful not to do something to a neighborhood, but do something with a neighborhood. And some of those groups we've worked with are Truce Coalition, Heart of Westport, Pendleton Heights, Likens, Indian Mound, Northeast Alliance Together, and several others throughout the region. And really, all of these different groups are what really makes this all come together and make these as successful and as impactful as they are.
So at this point, we're going to run through a few examples to show these various projects, from the timeline across KC in the last several years. All of the examples we're going to show have been in different locations. They've included different types of improvements. They've been up for different lengths of time, and they've all had different safety impacts and outcomes from the project itself. But they've all really built on each other to provide momentum for sort of where we are today and where we're headed. So we will spend the next several minutes kind of talking through some projects, starting with 2012, the Making Grand project. So go ahead, Duran.
Yeah, so this, as I mentioned, was the first ever traffic calming event or demonstration in Kansas City, at least to my knowledge. This was before I had moved here, but this was what kicked everything off and kind of set the precedent for all of these future projects. And so this project was done on Grand between 16th and 17th Street. There was a lot of different aspects to it: community engagement, beautification, activating the public realm, and of course, making it safer for all users. I think the catalyst to this was a BNIM streetscape plan. This kind of took the vision from paper and allowed people to experience what this might look and feel like. This was the first time a road diet was ever done on Grand Boulevard, which set the precedent for ultimately the road diet that went on the ground in 2016. Although it looked a little bit differently, I think it helped the community understand what a road diet is, how it functions, how it doesn't cause the world to end. And this is what we have today. And, you know, at one time, Grand, I believe, was 3 directions of traffic each way. And, you know, it has a long way to go to improve, but the road diet that was done in 2016 had a significant impact on safety. And of course, we've got the buffered bike lanes. And I hope that this is the first step of the evolution of Grand Boulevard and truly making Grand grand. But I believe, although it took several years for these changes to be made, I think the demonstration ultimately kind of allowed these events or this installation to move forward. And then the first project that I was ever involved in was the Westport Pedestrian Plaza in 2014. This was at Broadway Boulevard and 40th Terrace. This was done over the course of a weekend. And we demonstrated, you can kind of see a site plan there to the bottom right, and we'll show some more pictures. There's an enormous amount of excess asphalt at this intersection, and it creates a very awkward, very dangerous intersection that is not just kind of terrifying for pedestrians and bicyclists and those on scooters, but also for the motorists. If you've ever driven through this intersection or tried to pull out on Broadway from 40th Street, you know it's you're taking your life in your own hands and really the hands of other drivers too. And so we kind of helped organize this area. And what we found was by pulling out the parking from the curb to wrap further along the street, we opened up about 4,000, maybe 7,000 square feet of unused asphalt. We altered no travel lanes. We removed no parking, but we allotted about 7,500 square feet of space for activation. Here's a shot of this picture, or a picture of this demonstration that we held in 2014. If you look in the far left of the screen, you'll see the historic Westport light pole right there. Just out of frame is where the stop sign is today and was before we came and just demonstrated this temporarily. And so we brought the stop sign all the way out to the edge of Broadway Street. So rather than having to merge onto Broadway in this very awkward area, we brought the stop sign all the way out to the edge, wrapped the parking along this, and sure enough, we had all of this unused space. And I don't have the pictures anymore, unfortunately, but where you see people gathered here in the lower part of your screen, we actually had about 15 to 20 fourth graders demonstrating their karate moves. AKKA Karate was there at the time. They were a wonderful business to work with and had a lot of different events and partners in this. But before we demonstrated this, the thought of elementary age students performing karate on Broadway Boulevard was a horrifying thought. But just by simply moving some parking and some cones, we demonstrated how to not only make it safer for motorists and pedestrians, but also the users of the businesses and those on the sidewalk. And here's a little bit of this area that we had activated. You kind of see on the left there, a really awkward, dangerous space. And simply moving the parking and the stop sign, we opened up all of this new asphalt. And one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this is because this has an outcome that has not yet been realized. But an outcome that's a little different than some of the other ones. And so there's actually a couple of local leaders in the neighborhood that are working very hard to make this permanent. There's a meeting going on right now to ask for some PIAC funds to maybe make this permanent. And, you know, a lot of the work that we try to do, we have not been very successful in making it permanent, but that's kind of one of the goals. And this is an example here where the neighborhood, kind of at least leaders within the neighborhood, adopted this, made it their own, and now are trying to make it permanent of something that we had demonstrated. So it's not always you do the demonstration and have to fight to make it work, but sometimes local leaders, whether they're in City Hall or in the neighborhood, they'll take a project on themselves to try to make it permanent because they liked it so much. And I had to throw this picture in of Maggie and I. This is 6 years ago. We had no idea at the time we'd be giving a presentation on this. Both of our careers have evolved in this work. This was both of our first demonstration, and really, laid the foundation for the work that we do now. And I had to throw in these pictures just for fun. America's councilman, as the mayor, Quentin Lucas, calls Eric Bunch there on the left, helped us with this event. He's one of the reasons we're, of course, very excited about traffic calming in Kansas City, Missouri. And then also to the right, we did not know it at the time, but maybe we were foreshadowing scooters coming into the city. This gentleman was just on a razor, but of course, we had no idea at the time that our city would be filled with electric scooters. But this was one of the first examples that I saw of a scooter in the city. And then another one we wanted to talk about because it has its own lessons in it is 38th and Warwick. This was just a one-day install that included pre and during data collection, as well as community and surveys. There was a major community engagement aspect of this project. As I mentioned earlier, TrailNet and Planners for Health, which is a division within the APA, made this possible by providing funding to Bike Walk KC and Better Block KC. We converted a dangerous two-way stop. I live just a block over from this. It's a very dangerous intersection. In our pre-data collection, we recorded vehicles doing almost 60 miles an hour through this intersection. The stop signs, along with the curb extensions, totally radically altered this behavior. We had nearly 100% compliance with our stop signs, and this is one of my favorite pictures. It's a little tough for me to kind of point out some specifics without the pointer, but in addition to demonstrating the impacts of a four-way stop and the curb extensions and the way that it radically lowers traffic speed, we also ignited the conversation of creative crosswalks. MUTCD and the FHA is very clear that colorful crosswalks are not allowed. What we did here is interpreted to not be allowed at all. So we could only do it temporarily, but it really helped ignite a conversation of what crosswalks could be. And after years of work, we've kind of found ways to creatively work within those guidelines. They don't look like this, but what we did here, stop signs, curb extensions, and creative crosswalks are a theory that we demonstrated. We proved that it worked that day. This gentleman here, you can see just to the left of him is that temporary stop sign. Living in this neighborhood and just off of this intersection, I can assure you that that gentleman, even with a stroller and his beautiful young children, that car is not going to stop for him. He has to wait until these cars are gone to sprint across the road. But here today, or that day anyway, with the stop signs and the other aspects, cars stopped for him, and he had the priority, and him and his daughters were able to cross the road safely simply because of the temporary demonstration that we had done. And just another example of this is I'm not sure that trail is not the right word, but this is basically a route that students take coming home from work. And so this is an important intersection here that's still dangerous today, but there's a lot of school children that walk through here, and simply stop signs, bump outs, and crosswalks made all the difference.
So next example is historic traffic calming in the historic Northeast neighborhood. In my last few months at Bike Walk KC, I had the privilege of leading an incredible community-led traffic calming project that was funded by the Aetna Foundation. It was in partnership with KCMO Public Works, as well as a ton of other partners, Children's Mercy Hospital, the Public School District, KCMO Parks, the neighborhoods, UMKC Health Sciences. This project was it was a week long at both locations. It had extensive data collection. We did community intercept surveys. There was a ton of community engagement and community involvement actually installing the two traffic calming projects. It was really centered, these two projects were centered around measuring health and physical activity and the impacts that the built environment has on human behavior. So we actually use myovision cameras to collect bike, ped, and traffic counts, as well as driver behavior before and after the installation, which was pretty incredible to gather that much data, and definitely encourage my colleagues on the call, as well as other municipalities, to really build in data collection before, during, and after projects like these, so that you can make sure that you're capturing everything, capturing all of the impacts and the benefits. This is a quick before and after photo here of one of the locations at 10th and Benton. What we did see was that the installations did slow traffic down. It decreased rolling stops through the cross streets. We had better visibility at the intersections. Of course, it's shortening the crossing distance for pedestrians, making it a little bit safer, better visibility. We also saw an increase in pedestrians using the intersection. To the right of the photo is an elementary school. And so this is pretty frequently used by kids crossing Benton Boulevard to get to school in the morning. That's Whittier Elementary School. A couple of the outcomes, the permanent outcomes, this is up at St. John and Van Brunt Boulevard here. Similar treatment, did the bump outs and the crosswalks. But this project was catalytic in that some of the first permanent outcomes were actually included with this project. So we were able to partner with KCMO Public Works, where I wasn't working at the time, foreshadowing, but we were able to get permanent continental crosswalks. So that's the zebra stripe crosswalks you see. They were installed in partnership with this project. We also had an installation of a new ADA ramp that went in at the other location. As well as now, I talked a little bit about the Public Improvements Advisory Committee. There is an active project with dedicated funding for traffic calming along St. John Avenue, which is this east-west street right here in this photo. So lots of huge outcomes from this project. I actually just had an email yesterday from my colleague at Children's Mercy. They're wanting to do more research around these sort of streetscape improvements and what impacts they're having in health and in physical activity. So far beyond the safety impacts, there's also impacts involving health and physical activity. So it's just a really interesting thing to pull in your health partners as well into projects like these, because the impacts are very far reaching. Duran, this one's you, I think. Back to you.
Yeah. So also in 2018 was the Oak Street Mobility Lane Road Diet. And this was one of my favorite demonstrations we've ever done for a variety of reasons. And there was quite a few lessons and insights to come out of this one. We'll show some pictures here in a second, but this was done on Oak Street between 17th and 19th. This was a month-long install, which gave enough time for people to adjust. So the first day, I'll admit it, that, so I'll back up a little bit. We removed a lane of traffic. We brought the parking in towards the center one lane, I guess, to create a mobility lane. We also, thankfully for Public Works, switched the stoplights to blinking red. And that blinking red, if you traveled Oak Street to the crossroads, it's a high-speed corridor. Well, those traffic lights, by turning them to blinking red, changed everything. With the flip of a switch, it really became a calm, urban, kind of vibrant corridor now. It felt much less like a highway and much more like an urban street that I think a lot of us desire. So with that blinking red and one less travel lane, that first day of rush hour, we saw a little backup of traffic, and we had a line of cars that were about a block long, and we said, well, that's okay. I mean, that's why we do this. We want to experiment and see what happens, and it's probably not the worst thing that these commuters have to spend a little bit more time, but we know there's going to be some people very angry. And sure enough, there was. But what was incredible was over the course of the next few days, those lines got shorter and shorter and shorter. And eventually, on the final day of the project, we met with some of the leaders of KCMO Public Works that very first morning. They wanted to see, the impacts on rush hour traffic. And sure enough, there was almost no backups. I mean, the backups are 4 or 5 cars, which was absolutely nothing. Those cars were gone in 30 seconds or so. And so, had we just done this for a day or two, we just said, oh man, it was great, but we backed up the traffic. Traffic engineers are not happy at all. But because we were able to demonstrate it for a month, we were able to give people time to adjust. And, obviously these cars had to go another route and streets somewhere else are picking that up. But I never once heard of any visible impacts on the other roads. And I'm sure there were, but there wasn't enough where people were upset about it or complaining. I think we kind of balanced out the commuter activity by doing so. And that previous slide gave a great look at, this was the East High School Bicycle Club utilizing the mobility lanes. This kind of shows the road diet. You can kind of see that, cars typically parked against the curb. We brought them out one in the lane that we had dropped. The next picture demonstrated our micro mobility hub, which this was one of the first times we had a very direct outcome. So I think this was the year that scooters were brought into Kansas City, and kind of somewhat like they are today. They're everywhere. They're sometimes in people's way, and no one really knows where to put them. And so what we did was we demonstrated, hey, look, these should go in the street. And at the intersection, we found cars can't park all the way up to the stoplights because they impede on the sight lines. Well, these vehicles are low enough where they don't impede on those driver's sight lines. So what we've been doing is using these no parking areas at the intersection. We've been bollarding them off to create these micro mobility hubs. And these provide an organized on-street parking spaces for shared micromobility vehicles. No traffic's lost. These vehicles are off to the sidewalk. They're easy for the users to find. But it really took us demonstrating what that might look like. And I've been advocating for these. I said, look, we got to get these off the sidewalk and into the street. And I was able to demonstrate that. And sure enough, we now have a network of about 4 of these hubs with aspirations to do many more. You can find these throughout the crossroads. We got one downtown and a new one in Westport. But we like to think we've kind of found somewhat, maybe not a total solution to these vehicles, but we've certainly provided a space for them to park now. And, at first we were just seeing the providers placing them there each morning. I've now started to see this year where users have gotten used to them, and users are actually starting to use these spaces. And I think as we build more of these and it becomes kind of commonly known that you can park these at the corners of the intersections, I think we're going to continue to see fewer and fewer of these vehicles on the sidewalks and in pedestrians' way.
So this example is a little bit different. There wasn't a demonstration project ahead of this, but this particular intervention that we did here is worth mentioning because there are huge safety benefits that cities can gain from semi-permanent installations of what we'll call it. I'll show a photo here in a second, but this location's at 25th and Gillum. You don't necessarily need to read this slide. I'll just talk from it. So this is the aerial view here. There's a ton of pavement. 25th and Gillum is right by Children's Mercy Hospital, Ronald McDonald House. So this is in the Longfellow neighborhood. There's a lot of pavement. It is a little bit scary to navigate in a vehicle, not to mention in a car, as a pedestrian or on a bike, or if you're in a wheelchair trying to access Children's Mercy or Hospital Hill services. So needless to say, lots of pavement here. We went ahead and we closed the little slip lane that you can see. I'll show my cursor right here. We closed this slip lane with some barricades and bollards, and I'll show a photo here in a second. But that was sort of in response to a lot of concerns that we were hearing brought to KCMO's Parking and Transportation Commission. We were hearing concerns about this. We knew that we could close this slip lane as a pretty low-hanging fruit option, something we could do immediately while we waited for funding or other, our whole redesign of this entire intersection would be millions and millions of dollars and take a long time. So this semi-permanent installation that we did was actually installed by our in-house maintenance crews, public works maintenance crews. So it's not aesthetically pleasing, some may say, but it was quick, it was cheap, it was easy to implement with in-house crews, and immediately there were huge safety impacts. So we have less time of car-ped interaction while crossing, so we eliminated one whole conflict zone there. There's actual pedestrians on this, protection for pedestrians on this leg here. It also is slowing down the cross traffic. So on 25th, the east-west street, they now are forced into that T intersection. So they have to stop as opposed to just kind of zipping through that slip lane really fast. Longer term, I think our hopes here are to continue to work with KCMO Parks, because part of this is on a boulevard, to maybe, curb off this section, create some green space, install a pocket park, do some sort of mural or art installation. So dependent on future funding, I think we would have higher aspirations for doing something different with the slip lane, in addition to making, the rest of the intersection here a little bit safer for pedestrians. But again, I would encourage the other municipalities on the call here to really look at locations where you can do this kind of thing, where you can use your in-house crews, where you can use some barricades and bollards, and install something quickly, cheaply, that has huge safety benefits. And I really think that this example speaks to sort of the heart of Vision Zero and things that we can do right off the bat. So I'm excited to work with our Vision Zero task force at KCMO and identify other locations where we can do this kind of thing that has immediate safety impacts for all the road users in the corridor. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit into sort of where we are now in 2020 in this new territory, talk about a couple of projects that were done during the pandemic. Sort of the relevance here to traffic calming is that, as Duran and I previously mentioned, we're sort of evolving here. We started with these day-long installations, going to week-long, month-long, semi-permanent. And I think that all of those projects that we've talked about so far have really provided the groundwork for innovation, flexibility, quick thinking, in relation to how we can redesign streets for people. And so with the pandemic, with the stay-at-home order and the state of emergency order that were passed back in March, other cities across the country were rethinking how they can create space for people in the streets. So KCMO worked with our council members, some community partners, to develop what our Open Streets program would look like. So a resolution passed in April, and we kind of developed the Open Streets program that went through about mid-fall of this year. So kind of the goal was to create safe, dedicated outdoor space for people to get outside, get exercise, maintain social distance. And it included a few things: a neighborhood open streets permit. So that was similar to like a block party permit, but without the party. A neighbor could submit the permit on our online permitting format, and get a permit to close their street to through traffic and sort of do what these photos are showing. So we had, as I mentioned, I think over 50 or so permits that were pulled to create sort of these neighborhood open streets. Additionally, we installed auto pedestrian recall at over 100 locations. So that was really kind of prioritizing the pedestrians at a lot of our major intersections so that the pedestrian button would turn on automatically and you didn't have to push the big button. We also closed some roads around parks, and that was something that was sponsored by KCMO, and we closed those streets to local traffic so there was more room to spread out and get outside and get exercise. So this example is relevant because, as I mentioned, a lot of our previous work kind of built up to this. I think, we do have a lot of lessons learned, so many that I think we could probably have our own presentation about Open Streets program. We did garner a lot of national recognition because KCMO was the first city to do a neighborhood open streets permit and actually create a permit mechanism for this kind of thing. We did, as of September, we did kind of close out some of these efforts just because traffic patterns were getting back to normal, things were kind of reopening. I think there's a lot of lessons learned here about, if we were not in a pandemic, we would want to make sure that we were looking at tougher, guidance on signage and advance warning and that sort of thing. We were able to be really flexible with the permit. We were able to waive fees and waive a lot of the guideline, or waive a lot of the rules and stuff like that, just because we were in the state of emergency order. So I think there's a desire to think about what this looks like outside of a pandemic. But again, this example was worth mentioning just because of the quick thinking and innovation that, what would typically be, a bureaucracy taken forever to put things together and put permits together, we were actually able to think really quickly and provide this whole program for folks to get outside during a really difficult time. A couple other lessons learned that I wrote down here. I think this project also illustrated the need to really communicate and get the word out better about these projects and about these ideas. I think that's an overall lesson learned that we're going to talk about here in a second. But I will give myself credit that this all took place during a pandemic, and I think I was 8 months pregnant at the time. So getting the word out about the Open Streets program was difficult for sure, but that is a lesson learned that I take to heart in my role, that figuring out how to not only engage the community during the installation part of it, but ahead of time and planning it, and how do we make sure that we are equitable on the locations of these and that sort of thing. So again, I don't have a silver bullet answer for that right now, but it's something that, I think we're thinking about how to better engage and communicate and educate and promote these types of projects. All right, Duron.
I know we're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to try to be quick, but continuing this theme of evolution, this is, kind of where we're at right now. We'd always hoped with our Better Block projects to do something permanently, or at least semi-permanently, and we've finally gotten to that point. And now you're looking at a semi-permanent installation at Westport and Wyandotte and KC Mo. It's the Midtown Asphalt Art Project, made possible by Bloomberg Philanthropies grant. We utilized the same theory that we used at 38th and Warwick, which I talked about earlier, and that is stop signs, curb extensions, and some creativity. This in our pre-data collection, we witnessed cars doing about 50 miles an hour quite consistently. We now have a four-way stop. An important thing that I need to mention about these stop signs, the reason that I think they work is we've brought them out into the curb extensions. So you might see there kind of middle lower part of your screen. We've brought the stop signs out to the edge of the curb extension, of course, 3 feet off as appropriate, but the stop signs are in the driver's face. It's very tough to miss these stop signs, and sure enough, there's a very high compliancy rate of using these stop signs. Not only is this intersection incredibly vibrant and fun to look at, but it is drastically safer. It now feels like pedestrians have the priority here. We've cut the crossing distance in about half, and it's very cool. It's very fun. The purpose of the grant was for asphalt art to kind of enliven cities. Well, we took it a step further and we really focused on the safety aspect of it. And by using these curb extensions, we created, I think, 5,000 square feet of canvas for local artists that we used. And I think we're kind of pioneering traffic calming here. It can be effective and it can be beautiful, or at least vibrant. It's tough to argue that it's vibrant. I mean, you can argue if it's beautiful or not, but it is vibrant. And the safety impacts of this have been incredible. And this is kind of setting the precedent, although maybe future projects are not quite as colorful and intricate with artwork. We are showing that traffic calming can be fun and effective.
Keeping the time in mind, I just want to quickly talk about, we talked about project evolution and how different traffic calming projects have grown over the last several years. So has sort of the policy and the process. So here, I kind of outlined the old process. What we used to do is a temporary traffic control permit for non-construction. So, anytime you're working in the right of way, one of these is needed anyway, but a lot of these projects were kind of included underneath that umbrella. Then we talked about a few things that we added sort of during this pandemic process, sort of this interim place where we developed a new permit called the Neighborhood Open Streets Permit. We also did a couple of the Black Lives Matter murals. The Asphalt Art Project were both allowed and sponsored under council-sponsored resolutions. So we recognize that a resolution every single time for a traffic calming project isn't really realistic or sustainable. So Public Works is actually in active conversations right now about sort of what the future process looks like. What does the future policy look like for painting in the right of way for these sort of demonstration projects, not to mention semi-permanent or permanent traffic calming. So this kind of speaks to, we're a little bit in flux right now, I think, of what it's going to look like into the future, but there's a lot of groundwork that was laid, and I think a lot of really exciting things in the future. Duran, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about challenges really quick.
Yeah, and I think this might answer some of the questions in the chat box is, and Maggie and anyone else from Public Works is welcome to refute me on this, but my understanding that MUTCD is somewhat of a choice. Is that correct? It's not necessarily a law, but it's guidance, and so some municipalities choose to use it, some choose to interpret it differently. KCMO has chosen to. It's maybe it's not a choice, maybe it's a requirement, but I think some communities interpret it differently. I think we have a pretty clear understanding of how KCMO, not a choice at all. Okay, well, I go back on that. Let me say, I think some communities choose to interpret it maybe a little differently. We're pretty clear of how KCMO interprets it, which is quite literally, and I think that's probably appropriate. But we know that it's open for interpretation, and you know, there's some ways that yeah, I think I'm being refuted quite a bit. So maybe Maggie should have spoke on MUTCD. Anyway, we've looked at the guidelines quite closely with Public Works, and we've found ways to kind of be creative within the guidelines. And a good example of this is this crosswalk. We worked really hard to come up with something that was creative and fun, but also within MUTCD requirements. And I have to give my hats off to David Miller and KCMO Public Works, who came up with this idea. This is really fun. People love this, and to my understanding, is within the guidance of MUTCD requirement. We've learned that there's some materials that can be used for a day. There's some that can be used longer. Guerrilla interpretation. Yeah, that's probably sums up my interpretations pretty well. On Oak Street, I hate to talk about it, but we use cinder blocks. Those were only a foot tall. They were incredibly cheap. They were effective, but they're probably not the best thing to be out there for a month or any long period of time. So you really got to be careful with materials that you're using. We have some guidance on this and some resources that will show soon. Be flexible and innovative. These demonstrations are an opportunity to push the envelope. I think there was a question about how do we do these if they're not MUTC compliant. What we're looking at here is a semi-permanent application that needed to be MUTCD appropriate. But some of our other demonstrations, we've been able to kind of skirt around them because they're temporary. They're just a demonstration. And KCMO Public Works has said, look, we wouldn't allow this permanently, but we're going to allow you to do it for a day for experimental purposes. And then you've got to communicate and educate. Something I've learned with all these projects is when you're attempting to slow down motorists, even just a few miles an hour, you have to have thick skin. People are going to be upset, even if it might be in their best interest in slowing down traffic and being safer for everyone. You're going to have some people that are upset that they have to slow down a little bit. And you need to let the neighborhoods know what's happening. Businesses need to be aware of what's happening. And something we've learned is that, it's not just the businesses in the neighborhoods, but also utility companies and all of the city departments and agencies. And then one of the major challenges we have in traffic calming is the equity. Most of our demonstrations have been done west of Troost. You see the open streets map here. You can see there's a very concentrated area that these demonstrations were done in. And so this is one of the major challenges of how do we distribute these demonstrations and these improvements and these investments equitably. And there's going to be different reactions based on different neighborhoods. So while I was in Brookside doing some of these open street permits, people were so thankful. I mean, just begging for these improvements. We did a demonstration once on Troost in 2017. It was very cool. It worked just as well as any of the other ones. But we have people come up to us and they say, who are you doing this for? Are you doing this for me? Or are you doing this for the people that you want to build apartments for? And that was something we had not heard in some of our demonstrations. And I think as you go throughout the city, there are neighborhoods that rightfully feel threatened by some investments that are necessary. And so how do we make sure that we build streets and areas that are safe for everyone without threatening the affordability of the neighborhoods? And I don't have a great answer for that. It's something that tactical urbanists and designers and public officials are having to deal with all throughout our country. But it is something to be conscious of you got to distribute this equitably. But at the same time, you don't want to do something to a neighborhood. You need to do something with the neighborhood.
In the interest of time, I'm just going to hold us on this slide. You guys can read this here, what we're kind of looking forward to, Vision Zero resolution, some of the policy stuff I talked about, but I do want to give us a couple minutes to address some questions. I know a lot of them are around MUTCD. I'm not an engineer, so that's a disclaimer, but I will say that it is very important to work alongside with our engineers when we're doing these installations to make sure that we are within the MUTCD guidelines. KCMO follows MUTCD guidance. That's our framework, as is, I'm sure, for all the other municipalities on the call. So it is very important to make sure that, and why I think a lot of these projects have been successful, working with the community, organizations, people like Duron, Bike Walk KC, working alongside the engineers to make sure that these projects are within, MUTCD guidance, and that they're seeing their full potential in as far as safety impacts and permanent outcomes. So did want to address that sort of from the public works side of things. Amanda, do you want to go ahead and do some questions? We only have about 5 minutes left.
Sure, we can do that. I did go ahead and just paste some links in the chat for your references. I know that's a slide that's coming up there, Maggie. For the record, I did save all of the questions, so any that don't get answered in the time that we have, we can certainly address after the fact. One that I thought would be good to prioritize was, what are some good roles for local and state government to play in promoting and supporting traffic calming efforts?
Oh, that's a great question.
And Maggie may be better equipped to answer this, but from my perspective, there's, especially when we compare this to roadway improvements, specifically for moving traffic, the amount of funding that goes to pedestrians and bicyclist infrastructure is so little to begin with. And even within that funding, there's little to no funding for these demonstrations. So, I don't know how we do it, but just increasing the funding for pedestrian and bicyclist improvements, active transportation is a huge aspect. That's probably the biggest aspect, is how do we get funding for these types of projects as a whole. Now, once we have the funding geared towards this type of infrastructure, I think this is a strategy to employ with that funding. So, okay, we have some funding for bicycle ped infrastructure. Well, what do we do? Well, here's a way to go figure it out. So we might have some ideas. Tactical urbanism is a way to test that and demonstrate that. Things might look great on paper. They might look good in models, but the only way to really truly know is to actually put it out there and see how people interact and use this. And so
I would add to that too. I know in KCMO, there are some areas under, like, highway underpasses, going, on ramps onto the highways that are in our neighborhoods that are actually MoDOT right of way. And so I think that there's a unique opportunity to partner with the state, transportation departments and figure out sort of what traffic calming installations or safety improvements can we do. I'm thinking particularly one under the Heart of American Bridge. I think it's 3rd Street. There's some bike facilities there. But that could be definitely improved, I think, for safety, for visibility, whatnot. That's just one example I thought of. So partnering with the local DOTs to identify project locations and figure out what are some low-cost solutions that we can do together, I think would be helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a lot of good questions, and I'm looking at the time and I want to get what we can. So this one is a quick one, I think, but one that I think deserves an answer for everyone to hear. What is the average dollar amount for a demonstration project?
I would say a few $1,000s, and that's the low $1,000s. So one of the most extensive demonstrations we did was Oak Street between 17th and 19th, and done for a month long. That was done for $2,500. Part of that was because we used cinder blocks as our barrier, which were like $1.25 a piece. I don't really recommend using those anymore. But a couple $1,000s goes a very, very long way. A lot of these materials, your traffic control signage, cones, etc., can be lent or borrowed or rented, I guess is what I should say. But a couple $1,000s goes a very, very long way. And I don't think we've ever spent more than $3,000 on a demonstration.
Very cool. Well, given the time, like I said, all the other questions that were asked, we'll get to Maggie and Duran to answer after the fact and figure out a way to share with everybody. So thank you all so much, Maggie and Duran. That was a great presentation. I know people learned a lot and have a lot of questions, which only means good things. I want to let everybody know that our next session is the story of Columbia, Missouri's Vision Zero policy, and it'll be in 30 minutes at 10:30. So I will put in the link where you can find connection to that next session. So once again, yes, thank you. A virtual round of applause for Maggie and Duran.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry we didn't have time for all the questions. Have a great day.